Going? Good morning, sailors. This is Miss O. Hey, notes for you for Chapter 14 on the Great Depression, if you need them. So I'm going to start with Section 1, do Section 2. I don't know how far we'll go. I think so far you've been assigned Section 1 and 2 worksheet. You're supposed to read Section 1 and 2 worksheet. So here we go, crew. Section 1, the nation's sick economy. And of course, we're talking the end of the 1920s going into the 1930s. Economic troubles on the horizon, industries in trouble. Some of your major industries that usually do well aren't doing so well. Railroads going to lose business to new forms of transportation, trucks, buses, private automobiles. Remember the Model T comes off the assembly line in 1908, 1909. You're going to see the interstate system being built later in the 1950s, but you do have roads, and so things are changing there. Mining and lumbering were no longer in high demand. Coal mining hit hard times as well because of new forms of energy, hydroelectric power, fuel, oil, natural gas. Let me scroll down here. Oops. Hydroelectric power, fuel, oil, natural gas, housing are going to be new forms of energy. Housing starts are kind of a key even today, you guys, in regards to the economy. Housing starts with a number of new dwellings being built. And so if times are tough, people aren't going to build new houses. So if you drive through North Platte and Sutherland and you see a lot of houses being built, that's a sign that the economy is doing well. So in the late 1920s, early 1930s, you're going to see housing starts are going to fall. And remember, when you're building a house, you have all the material to build a house and then to furnish the house. And so if people aren't building houses, they're not furnishing houses, people aren't buying those things, you don't need those people working the factories building them. Jobs are going to fall, furniture making, manufacturing, lumbering. So that's all connected. What industrial weaknesses signal declining economy in the 1920s? The older industries such as your textiles, your steel, your railroad, which were basic to the fundamental well-being of the economy, were barely making a profit. Farmers, of course, you look at World War I, farmers are doing well. After World War I, farmers aren't doing well. Farmers need a lift. Agriculture is going to suffer the most, which unfortunately farmers, it's tough on farmers, and it's cyclical. World War I, prices rose and international demand for crops such as wheat and corn is going to soar because you got to feed the soldiers. But after the war, and of course when you have more money and you're getting paid more, then you can buy more land, you can buy more farm implements, and you borrow the money to do that. And then after the war, the prices go down and you're not able to pay off those loans. So after the war, the demands fell, declined prices by 40% or more, took out loans during World War I, which I just mentioned. Farmers boost production in the hopes of selling more crops, but this only depressed prices further. Supply and demand, right? Supply and demand, the cookie experiment. The more of something you have, the less you want it. The less of something you have, the more you want it, or the cost goes up, cost goes down. So many farmers, if you can't pay your mortgage, you can't pay your bills, the bank comes in and takes over, takes your farm, takes your land, takes your barn, takes your farm implements. Banks foreclosed and seized property as a payment for the debt. And understand, you guys, banks, you borrow money from the bank. They're using your money. They're investing your money. If you don't pay them, the bank has a chance of going under. And so what's going to happen is that's what's going to happen. We weren't FDIC insured in these days. That doesn't come till FDR's administration, which is coming up here. So banks are going to fail because people aren't paying back their loans. The McNary-Hagan bill, this called for federal price supports for key products such as wheat, corn, cotton, and tobacco. The government would, buy surplus crops at guaranteed prices and sell them on the world market. President Coolidge, going back, the 1920s, President Coolidge took over after Harding died, Harding was involved in the Teapot Dome scandal. Coolidge vetoed that bill. I'm not for sure the reason why he did that, but it was vetoed twice. Consumers have less money to spend. So if you have less money, you're not going to go and spend things. Farmers' income is going to fall, bought fewer goods and services. And so it makes sense, right? If you have less money after you pay your bills and there's no money left, you're not going to go buy things. There's going to be a wider gap between the rich and the poor. Gordon Parks, he was one of the great photographers in the world. A lot of the really good really good 1930s Dust Bowl, Dirty 30s pictures were taken by Gordon Parks. So if you get a chance, you guys go look him up. Also, look up Dorothea Lange. She's kind of notorious for the pea patch picture, which is a famous 1930s Dirty 30s Dust Bowl picture. So if you get a chance, look up Gordon Parks and some of his photography. Living on credit, Americans appeared to be prosperous during the 1920s. Going back, right, 1920s, people were living beyond their means. Guys, go back to your American literature, right? The Great Gatsby. People are materialistic. They're buying on credit. They're using the installment plan, and they're going into debt. So they're definitely living beyond their means. Credit, that's an arrangement which consumers agree to buy now and pay later, but then you have to pay interest on that. In the old days, it was called installment plan, and interest was charged until you paid off what you purchased. And people, you guys, are using the installment plan to buy furniture, to buy refrigerators, to buy, those kind of things. Uneven distribution of income. During the 1920s, the rich got richer, the poor got poorer. Economists estimate that the average man bought a new outfit, if clothes, only once a year. It was common for girls and women to make dresses out of flour sacks, because flour sacks in those days were made out of cotton. You would buy the big, 50-pound, 100-pound flour sacks, one pair of shoes a year, one outfit a year. That's why if you go back and look at, you guys that are science people, you go back and look at women who lived through the 1930s, look at their feet. A lot of times they're wearing shoes that are way too small, partly because they're only buying one pair of shoes a year, and also because women want smaller feet. And so they would wear shoes too small and it would mess up their feet. So as they got older, they would have kind of feet that were messed up. 1 in 10 city homes had electric refrigerator, and there's definitely an unequal distribution of income. What did the experience of farmers and consumers at this time suggest about the health of the economy? Basically, scratch the surface. Beneath the surface of the prosperity of the 1920s, the economy is in serious trouble. And that's going to come out in 1929 with the stock market crash. Alfred E. Smith, he was governor of New York. He was nicknamed the Happy Warrior by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was a self-made man. He was kind of a lifetime politician. He was the first ever Roman Catholic to run for the presidency. He lost, never won. Only 2 presidents in the U.S. history that were Catholic, and that was Kennedy, JFK, and of course Alfred Smith. And Alfred Smith does not get into the presidency, and JFK does. Doesn't make it very long though, because he's assassinated. Hoover takes the nation. Election of 1928. The 2 candidates are Herbert Hoover and the Democrat lifelong politician Alfred Smith. Hoover did not have a lot of political experience, so it's kind of amazing that he won. Oops. Okay, the election of 1928. Hoover. His background, Secretary of Commerce under Harding, who will die in office of a heart attack and will be associated with the Teapot Dome scandal. And then his vice president, Coolidge, will take over. So he also is Secretary of Commerce under Coolidge. Kind of interesting tidbit about Coolidge. Coolidge's son, I think he's 16 or 17, playing tennis without socks on, wearing some Chuckies, I guess, type of shoes, got a blister, ended up getting blood poisoning, and he ended up dying. while Coolidge was president. Going back to Hoover, Hoover was a mining engineer from the state of Ohio. He was orphaned. His mom, I think, died at 9. His dad died at 10. So he's raised by an uncle. He put himself through Stanford University, worked his way through college, became a multimillionaire by the time he was 42, self-made millionaire. But he has no political experience. Smith, Alfred Smith, the Happy Warrior, the first Catholic to run. He was a career politician. He served 4 terms as governor of New York, which would be 16 years. He was Irish. He was Catholic, but he got defeated pretty easily by Hoover. Sorry, guys. The Dow Jones Industrial Average was the most widely used barometer of the stock market's health. It's used today. If you've been following the coronavirus and what's going on with the stocks, up and down, not very stable right now, but it's on daily. The Dow is a measure based on the stock prices of 30 representative large firms trading on the New York Stock Exchange. The New York Stock Exchange has been in New York, what used to be near the World Trade Center, since 1790, I believe. So it's been around a long, long time. Stock market is active today. And of course, if you've been following the events that we're currently living in and the stock market, you can see how we are connected to the world. 1920 stock prices rose steadily. Dow reached a high of 381 points, which I think now, I don't know, guys, I think it's 21,000 maybe. I'll have to look that up, but our Dow's way higher than 381 points. Bull market, which was actually being discussed before this all hit, the coronavirus hit, even today. But a bull market's a period of rising stock prices. So prior to the coronavirus, we were what was considered, I guess, a bull market. Americans rushed to buy stocks and bonds. By 1929, 3% of the nation's population owned stock, even though it kind of makes it sound when you're studying about the dirty 30s and the 1930s, right? It makes it sound like everybody owns stock. That's just not true. Speculation. Speculation is where you buy stock and bonds at a chance of a quick profit. So, for example, Johnson and Johnson. I own stock in Johnson and Johnson. Johnson stock goes from $10 a share to $100 a share. So if I was speculating, I would sell all my shares and make a quick $90 profit on each share. My son does a lot of speculating. It's not really what you shouldn't do for us, especially somebody my age. You kind of just sit on it. But a lot of people do speculate. Right now, because the market, if you tie it into today, it's a good time to buy stock, especially stock that's low. That's what Warren Buffett did. That's what a lot of people are doing currently. So if you have extra money laying around, buying on margin, that's where, never do this, not a smart thing to do. Buying on margin is where you pay a small percentage of a stock's price and borrow the rest. So it's kind of like I'm gonna put $10 down. I'm gonna borrow $90 to buy $100 worth of stock. So you're borrowing money to invest in the stock market, and you should only invest in the stock market if you have money to lose. You should not borrow money to invest in the stock market, and that's what they were doing. How did speculation and margin buying cause stock prices to rise? They caused overinvestment as people ignored the risk and bought more than they could pay for. So people are borrowing money to invest in the stock market, which is not good. Stock market crashes. In early September 1929, stock market prices peak. So they're going to hit a peak, and then they fall. Market starts to waver, so there's signs of trouble. Investors quickly sold their stocks. So what happens is if everybody sells their stocks, the market crashes. And so that's why if you look at today, what people do today, a lot of times they'll sit on the fluctuation of the market because if everybody sells, it crashes. If you've been watching the news, there were four Congress people that sold their stock, like they had maybe insider information, and that's not legal, which we'll get to some of that stuff later, but rather than sat on it like most of us did. October 24th, 1929, the market took a plunge, and people that are borrowing money, if you borrow money to invest in the stock market, you're going to panic. And so they panic, so they unload what they have left. And then that causes the market to crash. Black Tuesday, October 29th, 1929, the stock market crashed. The bottom fell out of the market and the nation's confidence. Most of the early losers on Wall Street were speculators. And that's what I said. My son Joe, he does a little speculating. And those are going to be the early losers, not ordinary citizens. By October, an average stock had lost almost 25% of its value. Typically, with the stock market, you also see unemployment. Those kind of go hand in hand. By mid-November, industrial stocks had lost about half of their value. So from October to November, they went from 25% to 50%, which is not good. The New York Stock Exchange, which is NYSE, I was wrong on that. 1792, not 1790. It opened in 1792, and it's down in New York, or it's in New York, near what used to be the World Trade Center, is where it's located. Nation's premier marketplace for buying and selling stocks, even today. Financial collapse, the stock market crash signaled the beginning of the Great Depression. So, kind of understand the things of the 1920s that we were doing was not good, which was going to lead to the crash. But I guess the official start of the Great Depression would be when the stock market crashes on October 29th, 1929. So that would be, I would say that would be the official start of the Great Depression. That's the period of time. So the Depression goes from 1929 to 1940. And the only thing that gets us out of the Depression is World War II. The economy is going to plummet. Unemployment is going to skyrocket. The crash alone did not cause the Depression. But that's kind of the marking point when it officially, I guess, when you can mark when it officially starts. But things started before that, and that's going to hasten the collapse. And then you're going to just have a domino effect. Bank and business failures after the crash. Many people panicked. They withdrew their money from banks. And remember, guys, in the 1920s, 1930s, we're not FDIC insured until sometime in the 30s. Actually, is implemented by FDR. So that means Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. We are not FDIC insured. So if you have $600 in the bank and you go and you pull your money from the bank, you may go to the bank and they may say, we don't have your $600, and you just don't have it. Some could not get theirs because the bank invested it in the stock market. In 1929, 600 banks are going to close. And by 1933, 11,000 banks are going to close or fail. And the money that I had in those banks, I'm not getting. Today, that would not happen. We're FDIC insured up to $250,000. So unless I have like $500,000 in Adams Bank and Trust, it's insured up to $250,000. If that bank were to go under, I would be guaranteed at least $250,000. So most people that have a lot of money usually go up to the max, and then they don't go beyond that. Government did not protest or insure bank accounts, so FDIC. 1929 to 1932, the gross national product was cut nearly in half. So that's a bad sign. 90,000 businesses went bankrupt. Millions are going to lose their jobs. Unemployment rate in 1929 was 3%, and by 1933 it was 25%. Look at, if you get a chance, watch the news. Look and see what's unemployment today as a result of the coronavirus. What's causing? Everybody knows, of course, I guess the cause of the unemployment today, but what percentage of unemployment is it? I know the numbers just went up again last couple of days as far as those people that have applied for unemployment. So 3% to 25% in the 4-year period during this time period. Oops. Okay. What happened to ordinary workers during the Great Depression? Many were out of a job. Others experienced pay cuts and reduced hours. Uh, in the 1920s, early 1930s, up until probably towards the end of the 1930s, we don't have a lot of the things that we have in place today. Workman's compensation and unemployment insurance and Social Security, FDIC. We don't have those things. Those all are implemented during the FDR administration. Worldwide shockwaves. U.S. not only country gripped by the Great Depression. The Depression was a world depression. It affected everybody. Europe was hit extremely hard. In particular, Germany was hit hard because they were forced to pay World War I war reparations, and they did not have the money to do that. War reparations, payments to compensate the Allies for the damages Germany had caused. They had to sign the War Guilt Clause, World War I. They had to take full responsibility economically and morally for World War I. Trade, imports, and exports are going to be affected. The Hawley-Smoot tariff, we talked about, that act was passed in 1930, established the highest protective tariff in U.S. history, meaning we want to protect American-made products. We want Americans to buy American-made, not Japanese-made, not German-made, not Austrian-made. It was designed to protect American farmers and manufacturers from foreign competition. Unfortunately, the tax was so high, the Europeans couldn't sell products to us. We weren't buying them, and as a result, they weren't able to pay off their bills. They weren't buying. So the Hawley-Smoot tariff was really a terrible tariff that had a very bad effect on us, even in America. By reducing the flow of goods into the United States, the tariff prevented other countries from earning American currency to buy American goods, made unemployment worse in industries that could no longer export goods to Europe. Countries retaliated by raising their own tariffs. World trade was down 40%. So the intent was to buy American-made and Americans to buy American-mades, but it had the opposite effect and on the world. How did the Great Depression affect the world economy? World trade dropped, causing unemployment to rise globally. Three causes of the Depression: tariffs, of course, the Hawley-Smoot tariff, war debt, policies that cut down the foreign market for American goods. Of course, we have a crisis in the farm sector after World War I. Availability of credit, easy to have an installment plan. People are going to debt and not knowing it. Unequal distribution of income. Federal government redistributed to the crisis by keeping interest rates low. And if you guys pay attention today, right, what's going on today in regards to interest rates? Interest rates today are very, very low. I think they're like 2%. They're extremely low if you want to buy a house. Borrow easily and build up a large debt. Germany and Austria were particularly hard hit. And why Germany and Austria? Because they are the losers of World War I, and a lot of the war was fought on European soil. Okay, that was section 1. Section 2, hardship and suffering during the Depression. In the early 1930s, a drought's going to hit. So, from bad to worse, right? October 29th, 1929, the stock market crashes. Banks are closing. People are losing their farms, their houses, high unemployment. And then us here in Nebraska, then we're going to have a drought. And it's going to be a drought that's going to last for years. It's going to hit the Great Plains, which is basically 5 major states are included in that. But Nebraska, I would say, would fill in to that area, also known as the interior plains. The Depression devastates people's lives. The Depression brought hardship, homelessness, and hunger to millions. The Depression in the cities, you're going to lose your job. Then you're going to lose your home. So that's going to force you to be homeless, and you're going to sleep on the streets. See a lot of hobos. You're going to see a lot of shanty towns, a lot of soup kitchens, bread lines. Shanty towns, those are little towns consisting of shacks. It's kind of like Skid Row in California, if you want to look that up. Skid Row, California. If you look up Skid Row in California, that is kind of an area where homeless people live. Different though, you guys, in the sense that shanty towns in the 1930s were tied to losing their homes, losing their jobs. A lot of the people today that live on Skid Row in California, a lot of those individuals have mental health issues, have addictions, drug addictions, alcohol, those kind of things. Whereas 1930s, it was just they lost everything because of the depression. Every day, the poor dug through garbage cans or they begged. Soup kitchens offering free or low cost food, bread lines of people waiting to receive food provided by charitable organizations or public agencies. Your cities, your states, your cities, your towns, churches, schools, just like today, a lot of times would provide try to provide food for families in need. So very very similar, I guess, today in regards to people that kind of step to the plate to help out the less fortunate. Conditions if you're a minority, if you're a Black American, African American, Latino, Mexican American, things things are going to be worse. Unemployment rates are going to be higher for minorities. They're going to be the lowest paid. They're the last hired, the first fired. There's going to be racial violence, discrimination, prejudice, bigotry. And in this time period, in 1933, 24 African Americans died by lynching. Latinos, which would be Mexicans and Mexican Americans, they're primarily living in the Southwest, working in agriculture. And there was a movement in the 1930s to deport them. And so they wanted them deported or expelled from the country. And people are stressed. People are under a lot of stress economically, and so that's going to lead to higher alcohol consumption, child abuse, spousal abuse, abandonment, violence. How did the Great Depression affect minorities? Unemployment, low pay, racial violence, last hired, first fired, bigotry, discrimination. The Depression in rural areas in southern Nebraska, for example, in Nebraska, in rural areas, life in rural areas is going to be hard. Most farmers could grow their food for their families, but unfortunately, during this time period, many farmers are going to lose their land. From 1920 to 1932, about 400,000 farms were lost. They were foreclosed on, which is a process by which a mortgage holder, which typically a bank, comes and takes back property if an occupant has not made a payment, or they'll take the farm implements, or they'll take the land. Many farmers will turn to tenant farming, which means they're going to farm for somebody else and earn a wage. And then, of course, things are going to get worse because then the Dust Bowl is going to hit. Plowing had removed thick protective layer of prairie grasses. Didn't know a lot about soil conservation in those times. So people are going to overproduction of crops. There's going to be little grass. Few trees are left because of deforestation, cutting down trees to make more land for farming, and trees and grass hold down the soil. And then you're going to have a drought for 8, 9, 10 years. And then the winds are going to come, and you're going to have the black blizzards. I'll try to show you guys a video of some black blizzards, but if you get a chance, you can also Google YouTube. There's some really cool ones out there. Black blizzards are the most severe storms. They were said to have darkened the sky. They were said to have darkened the sky in New York City and Washington, D.C. Dust Bowl, the region hardest hit by drought and winds. Many headed west, and they're going to follow Route 66 to California. Oh, just said that? Okay. Okies, a term that refers to Oklahomans, but came to use negatively. A lot of people would get on Route 66. They would head to California looking for work. And of course, a lot of times they'd get there and there wasn't work. And kind of people that were migrating west looking for work, eventually they refer to them as Okies, which is becomes a negative connotation. Effects on American family, family unit, importance of family units. But there's going to be some stress to the family unit. Monopoly game was invented, Kind of crazy, right? Monopoly's invented in 1933. And if you play Monopoly, the original Monopoly, all of the streets and the railroads all actually were railroads from the time period. Economic difficulties put severe pressure on family life. Men, primarily in the 1930s, men are responsible for the livelihood and well-being of their families, their wife, and their children. You have larger families, so men are going to walk the streets in search of jobs day after day after day. It's very hard on men psychologically because they are the ones that are supposed to support the family. Some men become so discouraged that they simply stop trying. There's despair, there's depression, they're demoralized. So a lot of them will get to the point where they'll just abandon their families. They'll take off and the family will never see them again. So abandonment was higher in the 1930s. Hobos a little different than hobos today. Hobos are transients, mainly men, but hobos in the 1930s are people that are just traveling, riding the rails, traveling, looking for work. Today, if you look at the transients on the railroad that hop the trains in North Platte, Nebraska, or they're under the bridge in North Platte, or that you see, a lot of those individuals are transient homeless as a result of maybe addictions or mental health. They're not there for the same reason. Why did so many men leave their homes during the Depression? Many men were disheartened by their inability to support their families, and so they abandoned them. Remember, there's a strong sense of responsibility on men, that men are supposed to take care of their family and bring home the money economically. Others hoped to find work and send money home to their families. So some were kind of birds of they would go work and then send money home. Direct relief is just, I'm lining up to the window, here's my money. I don't have to do anything, here's my money. Cash payments or food provided by the government to the poor. Some cities are going to offer direct relief, some aren't. And so that was kind of a state by state, city by city thing. Women, of course, women struggle to survive. They're trying to stretch food to feed a large family, stretch clothing. So they're going to can food, they're going to sew their clothes, they're going to patch their clothes, they're going to reuse their clothes, they're going to wear clothes that are too small, those kind of things. Shoes that are too small. Many women worked outside the home. So some women will go to work outside the home, but they're going to earn way less than men. Women are resented because the idea is we're going to hire a man over a woman because the man's responsible for taking care of the family. So if you're a woman working and your husband's working, you are very much resented. Especially married women. They had no right to work when there were men who were unemployed. So the idea is that women should not be working. They should give up their job to a man who's supporting a family. In the 1930s, some cities refused to hire married women. Teaching, for example. Teachers, a lot of times, if they were married, they would interview with their rings off, their wedding rings off, because they wouldn't hire married teachers. Children suffer hardships. You're going to see some health issues as a result of the Depression, poor diets, lack of money for health care, dental care, right? You're not going to go to the doctor, you're not going to go to the dentist. So you're going to see a lot of health problems as a result, and some are a result of poor diets, lack of milk. Milk consumption is going to decline, and that's going to lead to a rise in malnutrition and diet-related diseases such as rickets, growth. Children, their growth is going to be affected. Child welfare programs were slashed, which there aren't a lot of child welfare programs during that time. Falling tax revenues also caused school boards to shorten the school year and close schools. So schools are being closed not because of today, like the virus. Schools are being closed because there's no money to pay the teachers and there's no money to keep the school open. 1933, 2,600 schools shut down because of lack of funding. Public schools, remember, public schools are funded through taxes, property taxes. In Nebraska, 60% of property taxes go to public school education. Kids worked instead. And you don't have your compulsory laws, education laws like we do today. where you have to go to school till you're 18. You have to be in school so many days, so many hours. How did the Great Depression affect women and children? Women managed tight budgets. They encountered opposition in holding jobs outside the home. There's discrimination against women, a lot of stress on women. Children, poor diets, health, child welfare programs are going to be cut. Schools are going to be shut down. Teenagers are going to hop on a train and zigzag the country in search of work or adventure or just to escape poverty. Those individuals, those teenagers, are called wild boys or Hoover tourists. Many riders were beaten or jailed by what are called bulls. Bulls are armed freight yard patrolmen. And then, of course, psychologically, socially, and psychologically, tremendous social and psychological impact. Demoralized, lost the will to survive. From 1928 to 1932, the suicide rate's going to go from 10% to 30%. So that's 3 in 10. 3 times as many people were admitted to state mental hospitals, which in those days you had a lot of state mental hospitals. Stop going to the doctor, stop going to the dentist, stop going to college, stop getting married. So no college, didn't get married. Many people showed great kindness, though. Even though they have nothing, they're showing great kindness. Food, clothing, place to stay. Families helped other families. People became thrifty and learned how to stretch things. What you can eat, what can you eat? Buy for food that's cheap that you can stretch. Eggs, beans, those kind of things. All right, guys. That's chapter 14, section 1, section 2. I'll be back with section 3. Anyway, hope you're doing well. Miss you guys.